are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every, what is today, Tuesday? Oh my, at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and leadership practices from which I distill lessons that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices. So today I'm going to be talking about someone who certainly in his time was not a beloved figure of Americans, but there is no doubting his brilliance and the value of his thinking as we who are in the civilian sector and business and running organizations. I think we need to be willing to maybe set aside past perspectives and look carefully at people's careers. So the person to whom I'm referring is Isoroku Yamamoto, best known by his last name, Yamamoto. So Admiral Yamamoto probably is best known, certainly in the United States, as the architect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that essentially gave Roosevelt what he needed in order to declare war on Japan and enter World War II combat in an active way. I'll put it that way. We were coming up on Pearl Harbor Day. It's December 2nd today, so 5 days from today is Pearl Harbor Day. I believe it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah, it's on a Sunday this year. And I think if you asked my father about Admiral Yamamoto, he would not have very good things to say about him. For myself, as a student of World War II, especially certain battles like the attack on Pearl Harbor, among a handful of others, Yamamoto, it's hard to say that he bears responsibility for how the attack came about. That was happening on the political side of the equation, and so as you know, in my shows, I don't delve into politics. Those are what I call bourbon discussions. So I think we are well advised to learn about Isoroku. My Japanese is not good. Yamamoto. Learn about his life, a little bit of his life and background, and most importantly, about his military philosophy, in order to see there is no question that Admiral Yamamoto was an extraordinarily intelligent man. He was a great leader. And as hopefully you'll see as I talk about him, or you'll hear, I guess, as I talk about him, I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to conclude that he was in some ways a reluctant participant in Pearl Harbor. So I'm gonna go into the discussion now, and perhaps you'll see what I'm talking about. So Admiral Yamamoto was actually born Isoroku Takana, the second son of, I'm reading the name here because I don't, I want to make sure I get them as clearly as I can. He was the second son of Sadayoshi Takana, who was a former samurai, and Yuki Yamamoto, who was his mother. Now you may see, wait, he has his mother's last name. So he was adopted by the Yamamoto family, which at the time was a common practice in Japan. And it was done to continue the family line. Perhaps there were no sons of the family to carry on the name. And so the family Yamamoto adopted Isoroku, and he took their last name to carry on their family line. So from a young age, Isoroku Yamamoto was immersed in both traditional Japanese values, as you might imagine, having a former samurai as a father, but also modern education. So Japan had been opened to the Western world at the turn of the 19th century, and it opened up somewhat reluctantly and slowly. However, by the time of World War II, the Japanese had made significant strides in terms of modernization, industrialization. At the start of the war, for example, the Japanese, what was known as the Zero, the Japanese fighter plane, was one of the best fighter planes in the world. It was very fast and maneuverable. And at the time, the United States was sorely pressed to compete with the Zero. So going back to Yamamoto, he was early in his life. From early in his life, I should say, he showed an aptitude for leadership and military strategy, and this led him to pursue a career in the Imperial Japanese Navy. So he entered the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy in 1901. He graduated 7th in a class of 179, so in the top 5% of graduates in 1904. He continued his studies abroad, spending several years in the United States, where he was able to observe American society and military capabilities firsthand. And it gave him a perspective that would influence his strategic thinking, really, as he moved into the what turned out to be the latter part of his career. So having graduated from the Naval Academy, of course, he entered the Navy, and he rose very quickly through the ranks of the Imperial Japanese Navy. He served as naval attaché in both the United States and Great Britain. So he was posted in Washington, D.C. and London, where Japan had their respective embassies, and had another opportunity to gain insight into Western military technology and tactics, operations, strategy. So his time in the United States in particular made him very aware of America's industrial and military potential. So at the time, like pre-World War I, the United States actually had a very small military relative to her size as a nation, and her capacity, her industrial capacity. And although the United States built up her military to fight in World War I, that buildup was short-lived. And after the war, the American military shrunk a great deal. And so in the lead up to World War II, once again, the United States did not have a particularly robust military. It's not like today where the United States maintains one of the largest militaries in the world. So during the interwar period, the period between World War I and World War II, so Yamamoto became an outspoken advocate for naval aviation. Now, today we take it for granted that the aircraft carrier is the most important ship in the Navy of a of a large naval force like the United States or China. But and even that idea has lost at least a little bit of ground of late as drones have become um, more advanced. But in the period between World War I and World War II, where the Mahanian ideal, Alfred Thayer Mahan, who was the great U.S. naval strategist of the late 19th century, I'm going to be actually doing several shows on Mayer's ideas in the next season of Business Lessons from the Military. But from Mayer's perspective, from Mahan's perspective, the battleship was the most important capital ship in any navy. And the Japanese at the turn of the 20th century were definitely Mahanians in their theory. And the hidebound nature of the United States Navy was also very much in the Mahan camp. So as aviation, as the airplane, as a military weapon developed, so advocates for naval aviation started sort of sprouting up, but they by no means had the upper hand. And so for Yamamoto to be such an outspoken advocate for naval aviation really pitted him against the old guard in the Imperial Japanese Navy. It showed a lot of confidence. Well, first of all, it showed a lot of insight on his part, but it also showed a lot of courage because while I'm not an expert in the history of the Imperial Japanese Navy, when it comes to United States Navy, there was more than one young officer advocate for naval aviation who found his career essentially sidelined because he had pitted himself against the old guard. So Yamamoto himself was instrumental in modernizing the Japanese Navy and preparing it for potential conflict with the Western powers. Now, it's interesting to note that in World War I, Japan was allied with the United States, Great Britain, France, who were known as the Allies in World War I. I think there's a tendency to think that because Japan was part of the Axis in World War II and an enemy of the United States, that must have been the same thing in World War I. That was not the case. In fact, both Japan and Italy, two prominent members of the Axis in World War II, were both allies of Great Britain, France, and the United States in World War I. One of the things that happened as a result of World War I was the Japanese felt slighted under the Treaty of Versailles. They felt that they were entitled to more possessions in the Pacific, specifically the Southern Pacific. And so, and they felt that, the Europeans and Americans basically didn't give them their due because they were bigoted, which is essentially the case. I mean, you know, you heard phrases all the time like, our little brown brothers and that sort of thing. So the Japanese were not treated as equals in World War I. It was a common belief at the time. I would add, by the way, that lest we think that the Japanese are not susceptible to the very human trait of bigotry and such, I can assure you that that they are, having lived in Okinawa and frankly seen it firsthand. So this is not a condemnation of the Japanese, nor is it a condemnation of Americans or Europeans. This is simply to observe that it is in human nature to put down the other as a way of building oneself up, and we have to guard against that and look at people as individuals and rate them as individuals, rate their character as individuals. Right? The famous saying of oh gosh, I'm going up on his name. But he said that there are only two races: the decent and the indecent. And here. This the author of that statement lived through Auschwitz, so he certainly had an ample opportunity to observe those kinds of distinctions. So on into World War II now. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Yamamoto was best known for planning and executing the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941. So, as commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, he believed that Japan's best chance against the United States was to hit the United States with a decisive first strike aimed at crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet and essentially forcing the United States to enter into a treaty rather than fight a war. It's an interesting aspect of Yamamoto that even as he was planning and then overseeing the execution of the Pearl Harbor attack, Yamamoto was not optimistic about the Japanese defeating the United States in a war. I think that if Yamamoto had been in charge, I have serious doubts as to whether he would have engaged in active combat with the United States. He knew from his 2 times in the United States as a student and as a military attaché, just what a formidable enemy the United States would pose. He also knew the capabilities of his own country, and I think he rightly was doubtful that Japan could win a war. So I think that's why, in the end, he recommended the strategy that he did, this idea of a first strike, a decisive blow. I think he saw that this was really the only chance that Japan had. In the event, and it did not work out. That the strategy did not pay off. So the United States declared war on Japan on December 8, 1941, and history goes on. So Yamamoto continued to lead Japanese naval forces in the early campaigns in the Pacific, including at the Battle of Midway, which was a major and essentially decisive defeat for Japan. So Yamamoto died on April 18th, 1943, in an incident that I think has a touch of irony to it. So American intelligence intercepted and decoded Japanese messages revealing Admiral Yamamoto's travel itinerary. And a U.S. Army Air Force's P-38 Lightning, one of my favorite aircraft. It was a plane that looked like this. This is a P-38 Lightning. You can tell because it has the twin tail booms, the twin propellers. I just think it's such a graceful looking airplane. I have my little P-38 here always by me. So a P-38 Lightning. So it ambushed his plane over Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, shooting it down and killing him. And so, his surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, he was met with a surprise attack on himself that led to his death, which was a tremendous blow. Not just to the Japanese Navy, but to the morale, to Japanese morale during the war. So Isoroku Yamamoto's legacy, he's remembered as one of Japan's greatest, most talented naval strategists with a deep understanding of modern warfare and an acute understanding of his nation's limitations. He was both a visionary and a pragmatist, which is a unique combination. People tend to really be one or the other, and so that he could see both, and yet, by the way, subsume his ego and do what he was ordered to do. One may argue he was ordered to do something perfidious. Well, again, that's a bourbon question. But there's no doubt that in the end, a naval officer must do what he's ordered. I suppose he could have resigned, but there's not many, if any, naval officers that would have resigned in Yamamoto's situation. So I think, and this is certainly the case for me, despite his controversial role maybe in Pearl Harbor and in World War II in general, many historians, me included, recognize him as a consummate professional naval officer who was caught between what he viewed to be his duty and what he had concluded was likely to be the results of what his country was doing. And so it is for that reason that I wanted to tell you about Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's background. And then after the break, I'm going to talk about some of his ideas and how we can apply them to our businesses. America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. So this is Business Lessons from the Military, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. And I'm talking about Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and arguably the greatest, but certainly one of the greatest Japanese naval strategists in history. So I have 5 aspects of Admiral Yamamoto's strategic thinking that I want to share with you and distill some business lessons from. So I mentioned this right before the break. Admiral Yamamoto had a pragmatic realism as part of his view. So he understood the industrial and economic might that the United States could bring to bear, and that was so important in global warfare because he had studied in the United States and also served there. And he recognized that Japan could not win a sustained war against the United States because America's industrial capacity in the end would win out. The same was true, by the way, in the European theater of operations. It was as much our industrial might as our military might that defeated Nazi Germany. So he believed in, as a result, he believed in that the only way Japan could win was to make this decisive strike and hope to sort of knock the U.S. out of the war. In the event, it didn't work, of course. So I think, we as business owners, people who run businesses, lead organizations, whether they're nonprofits. So I think we have to be careful of engaging in sort of pie in the sky, unrealistic thinking. So there's a lot of discussion around this right now with respect to AIs, whether it's automation, large language models, right? So large companies, whether it's Google, or I should say Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, or Meta, the parent company of Facebook, or any of the other Anthropic, Nvidia, right? So these companies have tremendous resources, and they have a tremendous stake in figuring out how to use or how to build AI into a useful, profitable tool, right? And they have the kind of cash flow to fund that kind of research. And so, and it's only recently, by the way, that they've started floating bond issues to in effect borrow some of the money to fund the research. So for all the talk of an AI bubble and all this sort of thing that you hear, these companies can engage in, perhaps less pragmatic realism because of their position in the marketplace. But for most of us, we cannot. So we have to look at a tool like Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, very starkly as to how will its use increase productivity, reduce expenses, increase revenue. How can the tool be used directly and pretty immediately to enhance our businesses? Okay, and it's not clear what the answer to that question is, and it takes experimentation. But the experimentation, I think, needs to be practical, pragmatic, okay, as opposed to some sort of wild idea about what it will allow us to do. Now, does that mean no small or medium-sized company should ever sort of seek the stars? No, I think that it's fine to do that, but that can't be part of the fundamental business plan for a small organization unless it just has tremendous resources and reliable resources behind it, which most small and medium ventures just do not. And so this idea of Admiral Yamamoto's of pragmatic realism, I think, should be embedded in not just the planning for our companies, but also the execution, especially when we're facing some kind of new technology or some kind of either adverse or either favorable market shift. The tendency when we get a favorable market shift is to think, oh, this is going to go on forever. But of course, that is not the case. A favorable shift may just be a precursor to an unfavorable shift, right? And so we want to take advantage of favorable conditions, but in a way that is sustainable, that in a way that will build our businesses, not overextend, scale too fast. In fact, I'm going to be doing a show on this next week on people making money, talking about and kind of an archetype of a company that thought it sort of had the business world, by the ear, and it turned out not to be the case. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, decisive and preemptive action. So Yamamoto advocated striking first when necessary, as is seen in Pearl Harbor. So the idea was to, deliver a crippling blow that would essentially knock the United States out of the war and force America to sue for peace. So I think and by the way, it was a gutsy strategy. Okay. And in the beginning, I mean, look, Pearl Harbor went off spectacularly well for the Japanese. There were some operational and tactical decisions that turned out to be wrong, such as not destroying the fuel storage facilities in Pearl Harbor, and also not destroying the dry docks where ships could be repaired and rebuilt. Okay, those were major errors, and they had some, as I mentioned, they have some bad luck. The carriers weren't in Pearl Harbor on the day of the attack; they were at sea. So although several battleships were damaged or sunk, in the end, this did not cripple the United States Navy in the way that Admiral Yamamoto had hoped. And in some ways, it forced the modernization of the United States Navy because it showed the vulnerability of these battleships to an aerial attack. And so, but on its face, Pearl Harbor stunned the United States. And perhaps the one thing that Yamamoto, while he understood American industrial and military might quite well, what he, I think, didn't understand nearly as well as he should have is how Americans would respond to such an attack. And that was to get angry and to become, belligerent and fight back. So, but having said that, America's ability to fight, even with the carriers safe, was attenuated by the Pearl Harbor attack. And it did take time for the United States Navy to recover from that attack and to be able to go on the offensive, right? You see, even into Midway, Midway was a defensive operation on the part of the United States, not an offensive one. The U.S. Navy really didn't go on the offensive until maybe very late 1942, but certainly in 1943. So more than a year after, or at least a year or more after the Pearl Harbor attack. Right? If Japan had been able, and that was, by the way, the idea of the Japanese attack on Midway was to deliver another, decisive blow to the United States Navy. Unfortunately for the Japanese, intelligence had broken their codes, and so the United States Navy knew what was in store and was able to meet the attack and defeat the Japanese Navy, sinking, I believe it's 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. So, but nonetheless, this preemptive attack, it could have worked. It definitely could have worked. And in business too, I think that there is a time for careful planning. But when it comes time to launch an initiative, to launch a new product, to initiate a new marketing campaign, to reorganize our companies, we need to be we need to be decisive, and in some cases we need to be preemptive. Okay, so just because things are going along swimmingly from our perspective doesn't mean that they're going to continue that way. And so I think we need to consistently be examining our business, our capabilities, the market in which we operate, the competition. And rather than being reactive to those different aspects of being in business, we need to be proactive, even preemptive. There is a sense that sometimes the market will follow us. Now, you may say, well, wait a minute, small business, why would the market do that? Well, it depends. So sometimes a small business can start a new initiative and it catches on, and soon after, that's the way of the entire industry. So Starbucks is an ideal example of this. Prior to Starbucks, the idea of people wanting to drink premium coffee in a relaxing setting, it really didn't exist. I mean, there were a few independent coffee shops of that type around the country, but in no sense was there this idea of the third place or the coffee shop as it existed in Europe, for example. Starbucks started that and changed the entirety of not just the coffee world, but I think of how people looked at eating out. I wouldn't say dining out. Starbucks is not a place one dines. So, we can choose to be proactive or reactive. And if we follow Yamamoto's example, we'll give serious consideration to being proactive. And, in the event, hopefully we'll be long term more successful than Imperial Japan was. Okay, next, innovation and modernization. So, as I mentioned when I was talking about his career, Admiral Yamamoto, who wasn't an admiral at the time, was a strong advocate for naval aviation and aircraft carriers, recognizing that battleships were basically obsolete in the era of naval warfare. And so he embraced this new technology and studied it and learned how to use it effectively. And there's no doubt that it was used very effectively at Pearl Harbor. Okay, despite what turned out to be a poor strategy and some operational mistakes or tactical, operational mistakes. Tactically, what the Japanese accomplished was devastating, and Admiral Yamamoto was right. Naval aviation was the future and has remained the mainstay of great navies from really, as it turns out, at least the late 1930s and on from there. So we're talking at this point close to over 80 years, actually, over 80 years, close to going on 90 years now. Now, will the aircraft carrier at some place become eclipsed by some other technology? Maybe. There are talks about how swarming drones could sink an aircraft carrier at shockingly little cost, especially compared to the cost of an aircraft carrier. I believe the USS Gerald Ford costs something like $2 billion to build, or some huge number like that, right? It has a complement of around 4,000 officers and sailors on board. And if it could be taken down by a swarm of drones that cost, a few $100,000, that obviously at that point one would have to rethink the viability of aircraft carriers as a platform. But so far, that the technology to do that has not been proven. And so with our own businesses, we need to embrace innovation. We need to embrace modernization. So I know for my real estate company that I had before I joined the Navy, I was in that business at the time when first pagers and then cellular phones were developed. Blackberries were in there as well. I never had a Crackberry, as they were jokingly called. But the fax machine came about, and into the early days of the internet. And one of the things I found was all of this technology, including ever smaller printers that combine printing and scanning and faxing, all of these technologies meant that I could operate much more efficiently with a smaller staff and therefore more profitably. And I know that at the time that I sold my company, the amount of time that it took to do the sort of administrative side of my business, the bookkeeping and report generation and all that kind of thing, because of new technologies, I had reduced it by 50%, literally 50%. And so it was why I was able to stay competitive even as more and more property management companies were being bought up to make them ever larger, so that profitability or higher profitability could be achieved through scale. So I tenaciously remained a small company, making a nice living at it, until I decided to join the Navy and sell my company. But I didn't end up selling the company because I couldn't compete. I sold it because I had decided to do something else. And so, I mentioned AI is obviously that's the big emerging technology now. Having said that, though, I think there are still opportunities to use communications technology, things like the cell phone and the internet, with or without AI enhancements, to increase our productivity. And I know for myself, I'm always looking for ways to do that. There are all kinds of tools that are not necessarily AI driven, that can make our businesses more productive, more efficient, uh, give us higher profitability. And we need to be willing to experiment with them. And if we find the right ones, embrace them and encourage our people to embrace them as well. Okay, so innovation and modernization. Next, and this is somewhat of a perennial, I think, among many of the great military personalities, leaders, about whom I've spoken during the 3 years of shows, for business lessons from the military, and that is leadership by example and taking responsibility. So Yamamoto led by demonstrating competence, discipline, and professionalism. So he mentored younger officers, and just as he had been an independent and strategic thinker, he encouraged his officers to think independently and strategically. He did not demand of them that they parrot back to him what he wanted to hear. Quite to the contrary, he wanted to hear dissenting opinions. Now, this was not necessarily an aspect widely held in the Imperial Japanese Navy. And so his officers and the sailors that served under him, I think, were very, very devoted to Admiral Yamamoto because he led by example and he took responsibility. But he also gave them the freedom to truly express their minds. Now, once he made a decision, he expected and demanded absolute loyalty in the execution of the orders given to enact a particular plan. But on that score, that's no different than any other person in the military. We need to expect fealty to duty as part and parcel of how a military works. More junior people don't always have cognizance of the larger picture, and so we need to be able to count on them to execute the orders that they've been given, maybe not maybe pass information up the chain of command that they think it might be important for more senior commanders to know, but in any event to aggressively pursue their objectives as part of the overall plan. And in this case, Yamamoto was no different, and I think also correct. Once the decision is made, then everybody has to get on board and do their utmost to pursue the mission and meet the goals. So he was known to value intelligence and careful planning, balancing risk against the sort of pragmatism that I talked about under the first point, and he inculcated that, I think maybe the best word, among especially the officers on his planning staff, as part of the ethos he expected them to adopt. So the same is absolutely true in business. Okay, as business leaders, we need to lead by example. I was having a conversation with some of my colleagues recently, and I may have talked about this last week as well. It stays uppermost in my mind, but I am not one who yells or screams or engages in histrionics in the workplace. Okay, maybe at a football game, yeah, but and maybe when I'm sick and crabby at home, but in the workplace, none of that is appropriate, and especially from leadership, because rank and file workers, they will do whatever it is they see senior leadership doing. So if senior leadership is yelling and screaming, if they're acting in an abusive fashion, then they will take it that must be okay. That must be part of the culture. If senior leadership acts with discipline and professionalism and restraint, then other people in the company will seek to do the same thing. If senior leadership acts collaboratively, then people in the company will seek to act collaboratively. So another example, I won't give the names of the people, that wouldn't be appropriate, but I'm being asked to be a part of a project. In this case, it's a media/entertainment project. I did a very small project with this group a couple of weeks ago, and now there appears to be planning to kind of do the next stage. And I was contacted last night by the individual who's putting up the money for the project, and he asked me, do I want to be involved in the next phase? And I haven't responded to the message yet because I really don't want to be part of the next phase, because this particular individual is not a team player. He does not collaborate well. He claims to want to learn, but he doesn't. He's got certain ideas about how things should be, and he just goes with them. Now, I've been around entertainment and media circles for literally half a century, and That's not to say that I know everything. I certainly do not. But I do know that the bull in the china shop approach to doing good work in the entertainment and media business rarely works. Even when we think of great auteurs like Woody Allen, for example, or Steven Spielberg, these are both highly collaborative individuals. That's why, especially when you look at his early work and his best films, you see the same team, film after film, working with Woody Allen because he was so great. It was so great to work with him that everybody liked this team approach, and so and you see something not exactly the same thing because Woody Allen was making small movies. Steven Spielberg obviously was making blockbusters, but um, both of these men were highly collaborative, and it's because the making of a great movie, it takes a lot of diverse skills, and nobody has all of them. And so whether it's the producer or the director or the producer and director as a team, they need to recognize that people need to be collaborative, and they need to demonstrate that they want to collaborate, truly collaborate. Okay. And so, like in the example I just gave, while the the director of the project is one of my longest standing friends, and we've done numerous projects over the decades, and I love working with him. I'm not sure that it's worth it having to work with this other individual. Hence why I haven't responded yet. I remain in stasis. So these, we have to lead by example, and how we lead will be a very large part of what we get. And finally, just as we need to be pragmatic, and this is the final idea from Admiral Yamamoto I'm going to share with you, I think we need to be cautiously optimistic. So it's no good working for someone who's pessimistic or working with people who are pessimistic. If you think that the future is horrible, if you think that a business can't succeed, well, you're probably right. Okay. On the other hand, to be cautiously optimistic, to say we're going to do our best to create the conditions where we can be successful, where the business can grow. Okay, there are always going to be things outside of our control, the larger economy, what our competitors do. Okay, but within the range of what we can control, let's do our best to be forward looking, to innovate and modernize, to be pragmatic about the goals we set and how we pursue them, but in so doing with a kind of optimism that things are going to work out well for us. Okay, I don't think there's anything wrong in being that way. And if they don't work out well, okay, they didn't work out well. That's how it goes sometimes. Okay, but uh, they're more likely, I think, to go well if we have a sense of optimism about them, not unrealistic optimism, but realistic, cautious optimism. And if we instill that into our teammates, into our colleagues, then we're all working together in a positive way to make our business grow. And I think that is what infused Admiral Yamamoto's philosophy, even when he thought success was unlikely. He faced it with a sense of cautious optimism. And unfortunately for Admiral Yamamoto, it didn't work out the way he hoped. Okay. He was fortunate to live on to fight another day until he met his end. And we will too. We can always live on to continue doing business another day. We may have our setbacks. We may take some body blows from which we have to recover, but recover we shall, and onward we will go. So, my thoughts on Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the great Japanese naval strategist and officer. And if you have thoughts, comments, criticisms, by all means, please share them. Links to social media will be in the show notes. And let's see, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place. We'll have a cocktail and a schmooze. And then, of course, next week, I'll be back with the regular slate of shows. So I thank you so much for joining me today. Live viewers, always great to know you're there. And that only leaves me to say, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at